Hello, AB Bio. It's day 70. Wow, can you believe that? And of course, there's a run up for day 71 as well. For this week, of course, everything we do on the 19th, but you should get it done before the 18th so that you're ready for your exam and low stress. You can knock this out of the park. I'm assigning GR50 again because hopefully you already got it done last week, but everything we're going to learn this week has to do with GR50, plus it's a monster, so I'd like to get some points for it or something like that. The last FRQ practice ever will be the 2018, and we'll be looking at that on the 12th. Hope to see you there at the review. Plus, we'll get to give you some good luck, rah-rah speeches as you go into your exam in the following week on the 18th. Should be fun. Woo! Now, other things to recognize. We got to talk about the role of many, many hormones, but at least 3 that you should come away from today. And then where's the action? It's in the action potential. So we're going to start digging in the nervous system today. Now, really sad news. That should make you very happy. You don't have to pick up the 5 papers. But GR50 is your last ever GR. Ever. Oh, you should save them because they pay off in college when you learn the same things again, but without humor from that instructor. Now, what we're going to tackle today, of course, has to do with this thing. Usually this is Love is a Verb week. Everybody's like wearing pink and red and have frog hearts all over them. So my question is this: is love a verb? Technically, it's also a noun, right? But really what it is it's a hormone and a neurotransmitter all combined into one, and that's because love is actually a chemical signal in your body. It's produced by this wonderful thing called oxytocin, and this is my favorite shirt. I want to get one that says, I oxytocin, AB Bio. Yeah, that'd be cool. Now, this is what oxytocin feels like. Oh, look at that little cute bugger. This is not what it feels like, right? Here's what I want you to do. You're going to take all of these 8 different hormones, although it's a combination of more than that, and you're going to provide me with their major function and their name if it's written in initials. So give yourself a full old page, maybe even 2 of your ETD. Fill out the chart because we're going to fill it out together and see what you know. Some of them you should recognize. We've been already hitting several of them throughout the year. And let's see if you can tackle them. Big hint, it's biology. The name gives the actual name of it tells you its function, if you can speak Latin or Greek, right? Cool. Make the chart, pause me. Now we're doing it together. Now, if we look at this, of course, a lot of these involve this thing that has an H in it. Well, the H is easy. That's a hormone. And what's a hormone? A hormone is basically a message. So all of these are messages. There are ways that we control our body, right? Also, a lot of them have an S in them, and the S refers to stimulating. Unlike a conversation with Neil, these things, of course, activate things and get them stimulated, set them to move. This can talk to another gland, a tropic one, or it can be non-tropic and talk to a tissue and make it do something. So if you see an SH, it means a stimulating hormone. Now, ADH we have definitely seen before back in the excretory system because this stands for anti-diuretic hormone, right? It's a message that has to do with anti-diuretic. Hey, stop urinating, stop peeing, right? So this one's job is to stimulate, as most are, and it's to stimulate the kidney, the thing that's going to help filtrate your toxins out of your body, such as urea. And basically it takes it and causes to save water. So ADH makes you pee less because it's saving water. It's the exact opposite of A and P, right? A nice handy one from the past. The HGH. Oh, man, do I wish somebody had HGH the levels I did when I was your age. This is human growth hormone. Now, as it suggests, it makes humans grow. So human growth hormone, now it shows up in cows because we put it in there. It's also involved in stimulating, and it stimulates growth. Especially it stimulates bones to grow. So if we're little Timmy and little Timmy's not growing enough, his doctor can prescribe human growth hormone, and then his bones will actually elongate at those mitosis plates, basically the growth plates, and that stretches the bones out, which then stretches your other tissue, and it makes up for the gap, and you grow, right? You can also cause this to increase, or HGH increases your metabolism, right? It ramps up your metabolism, so you're making and breaking stuff faster. So have you ever looked in a science magazine and you see the creepy old picture of the old guy that's super ripped. He has this miracle pill. It's because he's taking something that's brought his HGH levels up to a teenager's level, which means it's increased his metabolism. That's why he's so cut. But that could also cause problems because if you have irregular levels of this, yeah, it's like the fountain of youth. And that's why I would invest in this if I was your age now. this fountain of youth ramps up the metabolism, but if you get it wrong, you could grow things too fast, like your bones, or grow them too slow, like, your brain. So if we look at this, this is linked to disorders like gigantism, which is known as acromegalia. Their bones are growing too fast and their tissue covers over. I think Andre the Giant. Or this could be linked to achondroplasia, like dwarfism. And little people are little because, of course, they have an imbalance of their HGH levels, mainly because they're missing that in their genes. If you think about baby boomers and how many boomers are out there that are surviving COVID-19, they, of course, are the folks that have money. And if I was your age, I'd be going and developing a bunch of HGA to produce it cheap and then sell it to them, because this is what Ponce de Leon was looking for. This is the fountain of youth. It's an anti-aging thing. As you age, your HGH levels drop off because you no longer need that metabolism. Your cells are done with you, especially if you've reproduced. If you increase the HGH again, you can bring yourself to a younger phase. Activity can do that too, right? Oxytocin, also known as oxytocin. It's basically chemical love, or at least what your body releases when you're feeling that love, and it makes you feel that love too. And this, of course, stimulates something. It stimulates the uterus, and it stimulates that muscle, the bag, the uterus that holds the baby, to contract. This feeling of contraction is why women that are induced into labor are given extra doses of oxytocin. That causes the contractions to increase, a positive feedback loop, kicking the baby out of the womb because it's time for it to develop. Included with that, it also has an impact on the mammary glands. It causes the mammary glands and the smooth muscles in there to contract and actually produce milk. So the cool things about this is those cells will produce milk for you. So basically what this is doing is this is allowing you, one, to give birth to the baby, kick out the parasite, and two, to feed the baby. And all while you're doing that, you're in immense pain. You don't feel half the pain because oxytocin gives you that warm, loving feeling. That's why a lot of women who breastfeed describe it as the closest, most rich love that they've ever felt, because, well, basically your body's fooling you into letting this parasite feed off of you to increase its survival. Kind of makes sense. It increases your reproduction, right? Now, a good example of this would be like dogs versus cats. I hate cats. And a reason why I hate cats is pretty straightforward. If you're an old lady and you die in your kitchen, your cat will eat your eyeballs. If you die in your kitchen and you got a dog, well, your dog will sit there and actually starve to death by your side because it loves you. And they've proven now that dogs actually do feel love, because when you pet a dog or you look at a dog and it wags its tail, its oxytocin levels actually rise. That's because it actually feels love for its owner. When you pet a cat, it doesn't. And when they wag their tail, they're really just thinking, could I scratch them? Could I scratch them? Cats, of course, were domesticated later on, so didn't bond with humans as much as we did. That's why they haven't attuned their oxytocin levels. So your cat really doesn't care about you. They would eat your eyeballs. Stay tuned for another story. Anyways, if we look at this, there's TSH, T3, and T4. Kind of sounds like the Terminator, but what it's talking about is the thyroid. Now, the thyroid is located right at your voice box. It's that big bump that's below it. The males are bigger because of bigger voice boxes, as well as hormones make that thyroid gland go larger. But it's TSH because it's the thyroid stimulating hormone. And if we look at this, the T3 and T4, those are referring to a thing called thyroxine because they're all involved together in a pathway. They also involve iodine, right? Both of these are involved in stimulating and maintaining what the thyroid is very interested in, metabolism. So this ramps up your cells or can tune it down. It's basically speeding up the engine. If you have extra of that thyroid activity, then your metabolism goes faster. Now, sometimes this gets out of whack, and especially in our area where there's the depressing amounts of UV, or let's say you have a vitamin deficiency like iodine, you can end up with hypothyroidism. And hypothyroidism is where you're not active enough in things like your TSH and T3 and T4, so you feel really sluggish, really depressed. For women especially, it seems common in the Northwest, and it's probably environmentally tied too, as well as genetics. And you'll tend to see loss of hair in the upper reaches of your hair, as well as depression and lower energy. You can also have hyperthyroidism, where you don't get enough of that iodine, so your thyroid gland swells up to try to make more TSH, and that's what a goiter is, right? Epinephrine. If we look at epinephrine, it's also known as adrenaline. You also see it confused and brought together with this thing called norepinephrine, which basically has the same effects or works together with it. This we've seen before. This is all about fight or flight. And fight or flight, of course, you see a bear, what happens? You increase things like your blood glucose, more sugar so you can have more energy. You increase your metabolism so you can burn that sugar. You increase the size of your bronchi and your breath rate so you can have more oxygen. You increase your heart rate so that you can beat your heart faster and run away from the bear. You have vasoconstriction in things like your periphery. You turn pale white because you're terrified because all your blood's running to your brain and your muscles. You're basically getting ready to run, right? Now, epinephrine is also used in this thing called the EpiPen. And that makes sense because if somebody goes into anaphylactic shock, they're not breathing enough. Well, then this will cause their bronchi to enlarge. Or let's say you have a Pulp Fiction moment where somebody's heart is stopped because they OD'd. You stick the giant EpiPen in them, and suddenly they come back to life because you just gave them pure adrenaline, epinephrine, right? It's one of those cool, of course, ones that talks directly to things like muscles, as well as a bunch of different tissues. Lots of receptors for epinephrine. Fight or flight. One other tie-in with that is you could think about the mother whose little kid gets run over by the minivan, and she runs to the minivan and she lifts the whole minivan up because she's running with adrenaline, because it also shuts down pain receptors. So the mom has amazing strength, but she's also torn out all of the muscles inside of her arms and legs and back because she didn't feel the pain. You know, the adrenaline rush. Pth and calcitonin we've tackled a bit before. If we look at the name calcitonin, you can tell that Pth is involved in a thing called the parathyroid. It's sitting beside the thyroid, and it is a hormone. Calcitonin, still called calcitonin, and they both have to do with calcium. Pth, parathyroid hormone, increases blood calcium, right? And that's handy for things like your nerves and your muscles, which we'll get into today. And this basically steals that calcium from your bones. You stored it into those places. If Pth rises, then more of it goes into your blood, so you can do that stuff. Calcitonin does the exact opposite. It decreases your blood calcium, and basically what it does is it's going to take it and store it in your bones, or help you to make sure that you get rid of that stuff by peeing it out, activating your kidneys, as we've talked about before. If you have a dysfunction in this, well, then you could end up with osteoporosis, which is common in women because they've been building a baby, right? So, PRL sounds like a NPR station, right? This is prolactin, and the N tells you that it's a protein, and pro means before. So this is before lactin, which sounds like lactose. Where do you find lactose? You find it in milk. This stimulates milk production, right? Not only milk production, but this also causes contraction of the smooth muscles in the breast and leads to secretion of the milk. So much so that, of course, mothers can't actually control it. Along with oxytocin, they feel good, but they start leaking. This all ties into that lactose idea of it's making milk so you can have a baby. Now, one key thing that we can notice about this is as the milk is drained away, prolactin levels would decrease, as well as the oxytocin levels, so that the mammary glands can reproduce the milk. FSH and LH are two of the most complex. And if we look at this, the FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone, right? And LH stands for the luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing, yeah, you can almost read that. Hormone. Always check the PowerPoint for the clearer one. This is produced by this temporary organ called the corpus luteum, which is quite a cool thing. It's the body of the luteum. Now, FSH, as its name suggests, is involved in stimulating, and it stimulates the production of things that come out of follicles. Oh, that's ova and sperm, right? So this basically is telling the gonads to kick into things like developing the gonads to go through meiosis and pop those out and actually produce them. This is about eggs popping out. Follicle stimulating hormone. Those levels rise throughout the month, and that's when you start your cycle, right? Once you've done that, it leaves behind in the area where the follicle was, in the ovaries and above the fallopian tubes, is a little scar tissue where that follicle popped out. That scar tissue becomes that new temporary endocrine gland, basically. And what it's doing, of course, is it becomes a gland to talk to your body. And that's the LH, the luteinizing hormone. It's basically regulating pregnancy. It's telling the woman's body that, hey, I just produced an egg. It's not an invader. Don't kill it. In fact, start to build up this nutrient-rich layer on the inside of the uterine wall so that I can support it in case it gets fertilized. Then, if it does get fertilized, the fetus will start to talk to the corpus luteum. And it's telling the corpus luteum, hey, tell the mom not to kill me because I don't have the exact same genes. I'm an invader, but I'm your parasitic child, right? If those signals don't go off correctly, well, then, of course, at the end of the month, luteinizing hormone drops off, and you shed that in your monthly cycle of dropping off all of that blood. Now, as they're doing all these things, we can see that most of these things are controlled by negative feedback. One weird one that isn't would be things involved with kids, right? We can talk about those glands. Screen going crazy. Now, there are lots of endocrine glands, but by far the most important ones for the body and for the AP exam would involve things like this lovely thing called the master gland. And who's the master gland? It's the anterior pituitary. When in doubt on the exam, if you don't know what's doing it, it's the anterior, because it's the one that tells other glands what to do. It's the tropic gland. We can see the thyroid showing up a lot. Thymus has a lot to do with the immune system. We've talked a lot about the duodenum as well as the pancreas. And then, of course, there's the gonads. And they're going to tell the body what to do as well. They're definitely making things like puberty confusing, right? So we get into that, there's also those two different types of hormones. There are the water-soluble ones that signal on the outside of cells. You should review your cell signaling. There's the fat-soluble ones, the steroids like estrogen in the last FRQ we looked at, that sneak into the club because they have no charges. Remember that the membrane is neutral in the middle. That keeps out the charged things, and it's charged on the outside. So it's all about hydrophobic versus hydrophilic. We talked about this elephant having two different signals, the long kind of yearly puberty of must they go through, and then the really fast responses of its nervous system. I bet that guy's feeling epinephrine, right? They also flip the car later on. We can see that these are control systems, and what we need to start digging into is this fast control system and the short acting, and that's where nerves come into play. So the endocrine is about slow changes over time because it's using hormones to spread through the blood, or as a nervous system, it's about fast changes, right? Survival. So that's what GR 48 and 49 were very much about. They're about understanding the nervous system and these lovely things called neurons, nerve cells, right? And how they work, as well as a thing called an action potential. Now, normally I would show you a video. I'll put the clip on there of these creepy frog legs that just start dancing. And they're severed frog legs. They've had the skin removed, and the only thing they're putting on them is salt. And they're putting salt on the outside. And when they put the salt on the outside, it actually causes the nerves and the muscles to fire and contract the muscles simply by changing the amount of salt on the outside. And that's pretty crucial because usually we use sodium chloride. And it's the sodium that matters here because nerves work on the property of salty bananas. We'll get into that today. Now, key things about this, GR48 is about nerves, the nervous system, as well as this idea of the pathway. It's stimulus, integration, and response in the traditional pathway to any kind of signal in your environment, right? AP loves that. They're going to keep asking about it because, people break their spinal cords and they want them to understand it. In addition, it is about salty bananas. And salty bananas, of course, is a story of how nerves work. They got to be salty to actually fire. Now, we've talked about this a bit throughout the year, but basically the pathway happens in 3 stages. There's the sensory input, like you hear something, you see something, you feel something with your skin. That is the sensory nerves that are attached to your sensory organs, and that's the afferent. And I always remember that the A makes me think of attack. These guys are going to attack, if I can spell, your body because they're coming in at you. They're affecting you, right? Afferent. Sensory nerves will take that in. They'll bring it to the central nervous system, including things like the spinal cord and the brain, if you got one of those, for integration. That's where interneurons come in, the in-between ones. They're communicating, figuring out what that message means. Then once your brain integrates it, figures out what to do with it, it sends out its response to the environment through motor outputs, motor nerves, right? And those motors, of course, will tell muscles and stuff to do things. That's the efferent. Always remember the E is like effect. It's exiting the body. So it's afferent integration to efferent, right? Or sensory integration to motor, right? Output. Now, key things about this is we can see that sometimes that skips a step. And they've already started asking about things like reflexes. If I hit you on your patellar tendon, you will notice, of course, that if everything's working correctly, it happens really fast. You don't have to think about it because this reflex arc is basically skipping going to the integration phase. It just goes straight through the spinal cord. And this is a leftover from our ancestors when they didn't have a brain. They were just responding to things quickly. And this one seems really weird that I hit my knee and my leg goes out. But it basically evolved for our ancestors that lived in trees. If the patellar tendon snapped, then the muscles would contract and you'd stay in the tree. You wouldn't fall out. And that was kind of a big selective factor. So notice in this one, this has got the input and it goes straight to the output. We are skipping integration because it's just going through the spinal cord. If that doesn't work correctly when the doctor tests it in many places, it's a pretty good sign there's either something wrong with the afferent or the efferent nerves, or there's something wrong with the spinal cord. And that's what they want to know because they can't talk to your spinal cord. Now, all of this amazing stuff is made possible by nerve cells. And nerve cells are creepy looking. They look like little aliens, and they're known as neurons. If we look at these nerve cells, they come in many different shapes, but this is the motor neurons that we the most care about with the AP. Our job is to make sure we know what how they actually work. So normally we'd take a quizzing class right now to make you really nervous, wink, wink. But today you get to cheat a little bit. Haha. You can't use your book, though I'm sure you will, and you can pause me anytime you like. But hopefully you'll write and draw this straight into your ETD because it's pretty darn handy. Talk to your virtual bio buddy while you do it. Right. Now, key things, you're going to draw these two lovely neurons in the dance that they're involved in. And you're going to label structures 1 all the way through 13. See if you can do it without looking at your book or your GR, right? Now pause me, see if you can do it. Now we're just going to do it together because I'm not going to wait here for 5 minutes. Now, key thing that we can notice, of course, this is where I spend all of my time, right there in that little box, because I'm about memories. This, of course, is the first nerve cell. This is the presynaptic cell, number 1. Down here, well, that's after the connection, the synapse. That's the postsynaptic cell, because synapse is what SCAR is all about, making connections, literally, between your nerves. Now, one thing that we can see up here are these weird things that look like trees. That, of course, are the dendrites, because in Greek, dendra means tree. That's why they call them trees, shells, right? Dendrites. Now, as we look at the next part, this is the nucleus, because this is a living cell that needs instructions. This is the actual cell body, but the most important part besides those dendrites and the synapses is this thing. This is the axon hillock. It's like the part of the saddle that's right before the part where you sit down. And as you look at that, that is the access point to the axon, the main transmission cable to the next nerve. Now, the axon hillock is crucial because if you don't get a big enough difference in ions, don't open enough channels, then this thing will never fire and you don't even notice. It's like listening to me repeatedly. Eventually, you just stop stimulating enough axon hillock action, right? We'll understand that more in a second. Now, as that travels down, it goes to the most important part, the money maker, the mammary gland. And that, of course, is 8. That's the synapse, the connection between two nerves where they actually don't have to physically connect, just be really, really close to each other with this thing called the synaptic cleft. That's where vesicles will transmit between neurons, neurotransmitters, these information in things like proteins and amines, most proteins, but then to go across and tell the cell, hey, I just fired. And that tells the other cell at the synaptic terminals what's going on. Now, this is the synaptic terminal end. That would be the axon terminals at the end of the axon. Now, as those messages go through, some of the cells in things like white matter have this fatty wrap around them. That's called the myelin sheath, or the Schwann cells. Now, the Schwann cells are support cells that basically act like the insulation on an electrical wire. They increase the rate of flow and reduce resistance. So they make it faster, right? In addition to that, these are, of course, the other thing that makes it possible. They're not touching each other because of the nodes of Ranvier. And we'll take a look later at how those speed up the signals by basically playing leapfrog along the axon. So pretty cool design. I'd make sure you know the parts, especially if you're going into the medical field, because, it could make you nervous when you take your exam. Now, key things, of course, is the synapses we care about are those connections between nerves and how they communicate with each other. Electrical signals are used by some of them in electrical synapses, but the one we care about the most are chemical synapses. This is where neurotransmitters are going from one nerve cell to the other, telling them what to do. So that's the one we're going to focus in on. And the cool thing is milk does the body good because it contains calcium, but so does meat. That's why calcium is so important for your body, and things like Pth and Calcitonin regulating are important because your nerves can't fire without calcium. Now, neat thing is, back to cell signaling ion, this is, of course, a ligand-gated ion channel. Its voltage is it's controlled by voltage. So if this one fires, it changes the voltage, which changes the shape of the cell, changes the charges around, right? As we look at that receptor, that will open and let calcium in, which can then bind with neurotransmitter vesicles, little storage containers. Once they bind with the calcium, a second messenger, that allows that vesicle to do exocytosis, spilling the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft where they just diffuse. And this takes time, right? As those spread across, though, it can latch in as ligand-gated ion channels and open up channels for things like sodium to flood in or potassium to rush out, usually sodium flowing in. Now, this area right here is where drugs work. Drugs and narcotics tend to fit into these receptors and can either stimulate the cell to fire more stimulants or shut down these gates and be a depressant like alcohol and stuff like that. Being addicted to things means that you can't actually open these without those drugs because you get used to having that concentration gradient. But most importantly, once they open, then basically ions can flow down their concentration gradients. And then you have a chance of a nerve firing, which is called an action potential. Now, what we normally do in class is we would then go and we would build this big, beautiful working model of an action potential actually firing a nerve. And you should do that at home. What you're going to need is some simple things like some beans, some black beans, some pink beans, any color works as long as you got sodiums for one and potassiums for the other. You're going to need at least 2 sodium channels spread out like this. You're going to need 1 potassium channel, and then you're going to add in a sodium-potassium pump. You can use toothpicks or just little pieces of paper with plus and minus symbols. Toothpicks work pretty good. And you should be starting all positive on the outside and all negative on the inside because you're loading a salty banana. More sodium on the outside, more potassium on the inside. Salty banana, right? As we look at that, try to go through a simulation, figure out how it works using the book. There's the pages above there. And then next class, we'll take a deep look at how it actually works. First, you would have a stimulus. You don't have to worry about that part. You saw a bear, it fired a nerve, boom. Then we're going to the action potential, right? So your job would be to explain how this nerve is now telling the other nerve and sending it down that axon. That's what we care about. That's the nerve firing. Now, cool thing about neurons, and this is not my analogy, but I love it, so I steal it. They are salty bananas because if a nerve is ready to fire, just like those frog legs, it's got more sodium outside than it does potassium inside. Hey, it's like a 3-to-2 ratio, so that it's always loaded like a hydroelectric dam to fall in if you're the sodium. That means, of course, as I load it, I am setting it up for its action potential, just like water building up behind a dam. And things can only flow on their concentration gradient. But we'll dig into that more. Salty bananas is a nerve that's ready to fire, fully loaded, right? Now, normally we would do, of course, a brain anatomy function mini poster. I'm not requiring at this time, but I'd make sure you know at least 15 structures of the brain: hypothalamus, pituitary. Oh, this is my favorite, the occipital lobe. That's where it gets visual. And then the prefrontal lobe. Oh, yeah. To help yourself understand this, but that's up to you. Now, with day 70, you should already have GR50 done, as well as 49 and 48, because they deal with this stuff. The 2018 we'll be going over on that day. Our target today was to make sure that we could explain the parts of nerves, as well as their dendrites, their nucleus, their axon, the axon hillock, and how the synapses connect them. What an action potential is, that's just a nerve firing, right? But it's a pretty complicated process. It's really cool. How nerve cells insulate themselves, that's the myelin sheath, which we'll get into more next time. And then how they communicate. Well, they communicate through the synaptic cleft using neurotransmitters for most nerves. Awesome. I think I just lost my voice. Hey, one more to go, people, and then it's AP exam time. Woo-hoo!